Hey guys, and welcome back to Honeycomb. My name is Keo, and today we're going to be brewing a coffee that we actually brewed a couple weeks ago, and I was actually slightly disappointed and perplexed with. But the roaster reached out to me and said, hey, something went wrong with that batch. We had to rush it. We've perfected it. We have a better profile now, so please come and taste this coffee. And I'll tell you more about that at the end of this video. But first, I'm going to brew the coffee, and we're going to talk a bit about the Philippines. So please join me and let's brew. All right, so I've already ground the coffees, and I'm just going to arrange them nicely inside of the V60. And in general, we're not going to talk too much about the process of brewing. Instead, I want to talk to you about something else. Now, this is a Philippine coffee, and coffees are actually made from all over the Philippines. This one comes from Davao del Sur, and a lot of the best coffees in the country that get the most attention, especially in specialty coffee circles like our own, come from parts of the country like North Philippines in Luzon or South Philippines in, Bukidnon, Davao del Sur, that entire area. But coffee is actually produced throughout the entire Philippines. And just this last week, we saw a lot of farms devastated by Typhoon Odette, or internationally known as Typhoon Rai. And, as we're brewing this coffee today, my heart really goes out to all of the farmers. We see a lot of the devastation in terms of homes. And while getting them back on their feet and back in shelter and making sure that they have things to eat today is a concern, the truth is many of them have lost their entire harvest for the year. And this is harvest time for coffee in the Philippines. And not just for coffee, but for other crops as well. But specifically, let's talk about coffee, which not only needs to be harvested from the trees which have been completely wrecked by the typhoon, but also the processing. The facilities that are used for processing coffees, raised drying beds, flat areas, sometimes greenhouses. It's clear that all of those things have been destroyed as well throughout all of the Visayas. And, climate change is not a topic that is far from our minds ever here in Honeycomb. Specifically, I want to talk about one of our residents here, Liter of Light. Liter of Light is a social enterprise that was actually born out of Typhoon Yolanda, or Typhoon Haiyan, which is the international name. And when that typhoon happened, Ilac Diaz, the founder of Liter of Light, saw that there was a need for solar lights because power was knocked out. People didn't have access to power. And he invented this light system that didn't have to be manufactured abroad. And when they broke, they were easily fixable, easily repaired by the locals. And they started an NGO, a social enterprise called Liter of Light. And Liter of Light is actually headquartered here in Honeycomb, and they've been here for the last 2 years. So we actually talk about this all the time here. Now, that moment has come again for Liter of Light. Haiyan has come full circle. Yolanda has come full circle. And the Philippines is once again devastated. Farmers, fisher towns, regular people, man, cities destroyed by this typhoon. And Liter of Light has actually already sent out their first batch of solar lights to affected areas, with the second batch about to be sent out. Now, that second batch is actually on display right now at UST. They did a large light installation for Christmas, actually. It had been arranged several months ago, but the timing is quite appropriate to understand why this has happened, why this continues to happen here in the Philippines. This is a climate change issue. In UST, they've made this big image of the sun. It's up tonight. They are going to be packing it up tomorrow and sending it to the different places where they're needed in Surigao, Siargao, Leyte, Cebu. But the design of the artwork in UST, you'll see, has an image of the sun for solar light, need for renewable energy. And it says over there 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that's actually the barrier. If we can get back to 1.5 degrees Celsius in terms of global warming, then these things can actually stop. We can start to reverse the process that has brought us to this point. So before we taste this coffee and before we talk about what the good folks over at Crema and Cream have done to improve this coffee, I'd like to take a quick moment to ask you for two things. First, try to buy coffee from the Philippines. Try and buy coffee that comes from the Visayas if you can, in smaller amounts and in lesser known, non-specialty coffees. But I do encourage you, this is a good time to support these livelihoods throughout the next year, because everyone's going to go into the rebuilding process. Everything's going to be more expensive for them. And while we need donations now, we need to be proactive and think about the long term in terms of the livelihood of these people and their lives in general. So the first call is to buy and drink Philippine coffees. The second would be to support Liter of Light directly. Now, as I said, they've already sent their first batch to affected areas by Typhoon Odette, Typhoon Rai. We've been preparing for this day for, almost 10 years already. I think it's been 8 years since Liter of Light was founded. And then that installation, that art installation that right now they finished documenting to send to the world. It's in UST right now. It's being packed up tomorrow, and it's going to be sent to other affected areas. And those are thousands of solar lights. But there are thousands more that are needed. So if you can, I would like to ask you, if you have enjoyed our channel, if you have enjoyed the work that we do here in Honeycomb, please donate to provide solar lights to our friends and countrymen in affected areas by this typhoon. If you want to know more about Liter of Light and you want to know more about how the lights not only provide free light and support for localities, but also how they also create livelihoods for women cooperatives all over the nation, actually all over the world in 32 different countries. There is an interview that I did with Ilac last year. Ilac Diaz is the founder of Liter of Light, and we do have a link up here or down in the description if you'd like to watch at length and learn more about the work that they're doing. But right now, if you'd like to donate, there's also a link down below to literoflight.org/donate. And in addition to that, all proceeds from this particular video, because we are monetized now, we do make ads, all proceeds from this video will also be donated to Liter of Light. All right, so having discussed that, let's taste this coffee. So just as Crema and Cream have made some adjustments to the coffee, I've also made some adjustments to my brewing process to help further open up these coffees. And one of the things that I've done with this particular brew is to adjust the brew ratio. So we've gone up from 15 grams to 225, and we added an extra 35 ml of water to get to 260. And that makes it a bit more dilute and a little bit more open. It also gives a little bit more time for the sweetness to open up. Let's taste the coffee. So it's actually interesting because it's the same flavors that we tasted in the previous episode of Explode Then Compressed, which are rambutan, stone fruit, mild chocolate, much milder, a little bit bitterness of tablea, and a smooth caramel sweetness similar to an arnibal in a taho, just carrying through the entire drink. Now, I did, as I mentioned, so there is also a note here of pink guava, honey, peach, apricot, chocolate. So peach and apricot are just kind of in that stone fruit category of fruits in the same way that rambutan is. But it also has pink guava and honey. I'm not getting the pink guava. The honey, it's very close. It's a bit more toasty, which is why I'm going towards that arnibal flavor. Honey, of course, very, very subjective flavor because there are many different kinds of honey. If you ask someone from a different part of the world what honey tastes like, they might have a different answer because honey is also has terroir, meaning the attributes of like the flowers and the trees that are pollinated by those specific bees will contribute to the flavor of honey that you taste. So this one, if you ask me, is a bit more sugary, more like an arnibal. It's still very balanced. The first one was balanced, but it is night and day in terms of how sweet this coffee is, and more importantly, how bright it is, how much more acidity there is in it. What happened was I posted that video to YouTube, and there's no editorial review for any of the coffees that or any of the products as well that we cover here on the channel. But I did get a text from Sherman, who's the head owner over at Crema and Cream and the head roaster. And he said, hey, why don't you come over and let's talk about it, because I have a few things that I want to tell you and I want you to get a new bag of coffee because we fixed it. You see, one of the main things that he spoke about with that box that I got the original coffees in, that Philippine Coffee Guild Tasters box. If you watch the unboxing, I had a few issues with it. First was that there were no roast dates. So it is not exactly known how old the coffees were, but we did find out from the roaster that they did have to rush the roasting, which meant for them that they could not delicately roast it in their 1.5 kilo roaster, and they had no choice but to roast it in their much bigger 5 kilo big barrel roaster and do big batches all at once and kind of hope that the profile stuck, I guess. But the results really are very different between roasting a coffee in a small roaster and roasting it in a big roaster. And this is a clear example of how the flavors in this versus the ones that I tasted in the previous coffee are definitely night and day. But I do encourage you, if you were disappointed by that, do come and taste this. It's not mind-blowing. What's mind-blowing to me is how much the coffee has changed. And Sherman said that this really came from A, the way it was roasted, and B, the way that it was stored. They had to refigure out this coffee. You know, they bought it at auction, and it had been poorly stored between the time when they had gotten the sample, where it had one moisture level, basically, and it was poorly stored and it had dried out by the time it got to them. It was like 20% less moisture, which makes it more difficult to roast, and it means that you do have to develop a new profile for that coffee. Now, how does this stack up to other natural anaerobics from around the world? Honestly, it's not mind-blowing. It's very delicious. Again, what's mind-blowing is the difference, like the jump in quality from the previous one that we had already tasted. Another thing that Sherman had spoke about when we talked was that the bags that they were shipped in did not have one-way valves. And usually we think of that as a way of the coffee to release pressure so that the bags don't explode. But the other thing that does is that it allows carbon dioxide not only to escape from the coffee but from the bag, because if the carbon dioxide is still in the bag, then the coffee doesn't go through its normal aging process. And I think that ultimately that is something that we do need to keep in mind, is that even if a coffee has the roaster's name on it, if it's something like a tasting box like this, it's very difficult to say what happened after that point. Even when a coffee is a winner in a competition, it still needs to be interpreted by a roaster. And all the people in the chain matter. If in this case, kind of a distributor or a reseller, like in this case, Philippine Coffee Guild, didn't handle the coffee properly, then one, it's a disservice to the coffee, it's a disservice to the roaster, and it's a disservice to the farmer. So this is a clear example of how important it is for all of us to be good stewards of coffee and the steps it takes between the farm and the consumer, whether that be a Philippine coffee competition or not. Now, kind of the punchline is why I decided to open up the ratio. Usually I like to brew with a golden, what I call the golden ratio of 15 to 1 coffee to water. But I decided to open this up and treat it with a bit more of a cupping ratio, because the scores that it got at cupping, and that's one of the really important things to remember when you're talking about coffees, especially coffees that have quote-unquote high scores, is that these are scored by Q graders. You know, oftentimes we're told that Q graders are like the sommeliers of coffee, and that's actually not very accurate at all. Sommeliers are oriented towards the consumer, towards the drinker, the person dining in the restaurant, so that they can serve them appropriate wines and delicious wines. And they're thinking about the consumer experience above the winery, I guess, the winery and the vineyards. And the Q graders are a group of people that really pay their attention towards the producers and to the farms to make sure that the quality is there. But that does not necessarily mean that the flavor is there. This is a good coffee that is relatively free from defect, and that's something that the Philippine Coffee Quality competition has been able to determine and has been able to encourage. However, when consuming it, if we want to replicate the experience that those people had, we almost need to brew it differently, brew it like it was a cupping, and not the way that we would normally just brew coffee every day. And another way that I'm doing that is by letting the coffee cool. You know, at cuppings, when they're grading these coffees, they brew them and they taste them at, gosh, what? 4 minutes, 8 minutes, 12 minutes, up to 20 minutes after it was brewed. And there are not very many people who want to drink their coffee 20 minutes after it was brewed. So that's why I'm just pouring a little bit out and letting it cool right away so that we can get towards some of those sweeter and more, higher, deeper acid tasting notes that only come out when the coffee has dropped in temperature. So that's that. Happy to report, it's a great coffee. Is it worth your money? Yes, it is worth your money. It's not mind-blowing, but again, it is so important to support Philippine agriculture and Philippine coffees, especially at this point in time. You know, we import so much coffee, and so much emphasis in making better coffees is to export it. But the truth is that the Philippines consume so much coffee that if we just drank a lot more of our own coffee, we could completely change our own industry. We could completely change the perspective of farmers. You know, it's something that's been done in Vietnam. It's something that's been done in other countries all around the world, other producing countries around the world. And if we can get to a place where we can focus on replicating that rather than replicating what's in a cafe in Seattle, in a roastery in Seattle, I think we could go a long way, not just in having better coffees, but in guaranteeing the future and the livelihood for farmers and makers of coffee, people in the industry all around the country, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So those are my thoughts. If you do have time, please make sure, one, that you do watch our ads and play the video again if you can, because again, we're donating all of the proceeds from this video to Liter of Light, so that we can provide solar lights for people who are in dire need right now. And if you have other ways to help, I do encourage you to do that. Donate what you have. If you have things like blankets on hand, send those out. That's needed right away. And then donate at literoflight.org/donate to help support the cause, where Liter of Light is building up futures and security for those affected by this loss of power. I saw one report saying that places like Siargao won't have power or stable internet for another 6 months, which is it's something that we should all be concerned about. Something to keep in mind throughout the holidays. All right. Well, I wish you guys good luck. I wish you guys good health. I wish you guys a happy holidays and a future. Peace.